This is Ben Hoekman. You probably don't know Ben because Ben is brand new. Ben is the associate pastor at Covenant CRC up in Appleton with Pastor Mark Plummer. We have also had Gary on the program before from Covenant CRC. So getting to know you guys better. And Ben, welcome to Classis, Wisconsin. You mind introducing yourself first and foremost?
Thank you, Zach. I am absolutely delighted to be here in Northeast Wisconsin and part of Classis, Wisconsin, as you mentioned, as associate pastor at Covenant CRC. My wife and I moved to Wisconsin just over a month ago, so I am very, very new to
Yeah.
the area. We both are from Michigan, my wife Liz and I, and over the last several months have been discerning a call to a congregation, and God just made it very, very abundantly clear that he was calling us to Covenant. And we are just so thankful to be here and to be engaging in ministry with such a wonderful congregation and really a very vibrant Classis too. I've just been so impressed with everyone that I've met throughout Classis so far. And I'm looking forward to building relationships over the coming months and years, especially because I'm in the process of working my way toward ordination as a commissioned pastor in Classis, Wisconsin. So my role at Covenant CRC is primarily geared toward youth and adult discipleship, but I'll also be helping with some preaching and pastoral care and worship leadership. But in terms of my continued growth in ministry, the council at Covenant thought that it would be wise to have me seek ordination as a commissioned pastor, especially because it's a helpful bridge toward eventual ordination as a minister of the word. So that's kind of another hat that I wear. In addition to being a pastor, I'm also a student at Calvin Seminary. I've been working on my MDiv part-time for several years now at Calvin, and I'm anticipating being able to graduate in 2024 with my MDiv. So I have just a handful of courses left, thankfully. It's been a longer journey than I thought it would be when I started out, but God has been so very present every step of the way, and I'm thankful to be on the home stretch in many respects with that.
So you and I have a lot professionally in common, and you mentioned a lot of terms that maybe someone watching wouldn't understand. So,
that's true.
So, just to fill that out a little bit, I also went the commissioned pastor route. I also, we talked about this before I hit record, view the commissioned pastor as sort of a bridge to minister of the word and sacrament. So like you, I'm in a distance program, taking it very slowly, and that's a grace that the commissioned pastor status affords me and will afford you as well. But just tell people what being a commissioned pastor, like what do you mean when you say that? And then talk a little bit about the process that you will begin in Classis, Wisconsin to receive that commissioned pastor status.
Yeah, absolutely. So commissioned pastors in the Christian Reformed Church are ordained for ministry in a very local context. So it's a separate category of ministry. It's actually been established as the fourth office of ministry in the CRC, according to our church order. So we have ministers of the word, we have elders, we have deacons, and then commissioned pastors. And there's some interesting history behind that throughout the last, probably 40 or 50 years or more. This office of ministry was initially called that of evangelist. And then several years ago, Synod decided to change that to a different title, which was ministry associate. And then most recently, they decided to change it once again to what we know it now as commissioned pastor. So most commissioned pastors in our denomination are ordained very locally within their own classis. They're still examined just like a minister of the word would be. So the exam is comprised of a sermon evaluation, a biblical and theological exam. So I'll be actually interviewed by a pastor in Classis, Wisconsin at the upcoming February 2023 meeting. where they'll ask me a series of questions related to Reformed theology, hermeneutics, biblical studies, but it will also have a section that's related to very practical ministry matters in terms of how I would approach pastoral care and counseling, different types of leadership situations that I might find myself in. So again, that whole process is meant to be very intentional at the Classis level. But then once I am approved, Lord willing, at that Classis meeting, which will also include a sermon evaluation, which I will also be preaching already this fall at the September meeting in Delavan on the 27th of this month. But once I've completed all of those requirements and will be eligible for ordination as a commissioned pastor, I will then be able to engage in what the CRC designates as the official acts of ministry. It's what our church order describes it. So I'll be able to preach the word, administer the sacraments, lead in a profession of faith for new members, those types of things that I would not be able to do as an unordained staff person.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple times that it was a very local thing. What do you mean by that?
So in terms of it being a local designation, what that means is that I will be credentialed within Classis, Wisconsin. As a minister of the word, you can accept a call from any congregation or ministry throughout the entire denomination. And that will be the case for me once I have graduated with my MDiv from Calvin Seminary and have been approved by the denominational candidacy committee and declared eligible as a candidate at Synod 2024, Lord willing.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, then I could essentially accept a call from anywhere. Now, my plan right now is to stay in Appleton many years, obviously.
Sure.
My wife and I love it out here, but as a commissioned pastor, I would be credentialed simply within Classis, Wisconsin, specifically for the ministry that I'm doing at Covenant Church.
Yes. So you're commissioned to a specific call, basically.
Exactly.
So the one thing you mentioned, the ministerial duties that you'll be able to do, Lord's Supper, etc. You could do that for any church in Classis, Wisconsin.
That is correct.
So Oostburg CRC could say, and I've had the opportunity to do a baptism at Christ Community Church one time. So Oostburg CRC could say, "Oh man, we haven't had communion in a while. Both our pastors are out. Ben, could you come and serve communion?" You would be able to do that should you, Lord willing, sustain the examination in the winter, spring, whatever we call it, meeting. You could not go back to Kalamazoo. Is that where you said you're from?
Yes.
Where your church was, and do Lord's Supper there because your commissioning is in Classis, Wisconsin.
That is correct.
It also requires you, and maybe I'm wrong on this actually, but I think you're required to serve under another pastor. Is that true?
That is also true in most circumstances.
Okay.
So the church order does have some exceptions included, which essentially state that if a church has found a candidate that they want to call as their pastor in a solo capacity, the church order does allow a commissioned pastor to serve in a solo role. However, there are additional requirements that have to be met in order for that to be possible.
Got it. Probably relating to education track that would start. That's my guess. I don't know. I haven't read it in a while.
Because ideally, and you and I both know this to be true, and for those of you listening to the podcast, you may know this as well, but historically speaking, the Christian Reformed Church has placed a very high value on theological education, as they should.
Yeah, right.
And for most commissioned pastors, especially those serving in a solo role for a congregation, the goal would be for them to eventually receive their Master of Divinity degree and be able to become a minister of the word down the road.
Yeah. So let me press into this. I got asked this in my commissioned pastor examination, so maybe this is prepping you for a question that will come down the line. But if you're already pursuing your MDiv, why pursue the commissioned pastor track in the meantime?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. I think I may have mentioned this earlier, maybe even in our conversation before recording the podcast, but my goal right now is to graduate from seminary in 2024.
Mhm.
And by starting this ordained ministry position in 2022, being a commissioned pastor just makes a lot of sense because it will allow me the same types of ministry privileges that a minister of the word would have. So being able to preach again, administer the sacraments, being able to raise my arms even to give the
Yeah, yeah,
benediction
there's
to
little
the
things like that.
congregation. So there's extreme benefit to having that ordination already. And even in more recent years, the commissioned pastor office as a whole has really been used for a bridge, so to speak,
Yeah.
toward eventually becoming a minister of the word. I think our denominational candidacy director, Susan LeClaire, actually went through that process herself, if I remember correctly. I think she had been a commissioned pastor out in Classis, Red Mesa in New Mexico as she was finishing up her seminary education. And then she served a congregation in Michigan for a while and is now in that denominational candidacy director position. So it's becoming, I would say, a growing phenomenon throughout the CRC for pastors like us who
Yeah,
start in that commission pastor role.
which is really great. And I'm a huge advocate, and it comes up like almost every podcast we film. Like I end up talking about the LDN program, Leadership
Oh,
Development Network,
absolutely.
which, like I said, I mention it all the time. So if your church would put you forward for LDN, you should do it. That's how I started before the commissioned pastor examination. But kind of with that, this desire to train lay people and give them leadership role in the church, I think is really biblical and really healthy for the church, because we're finding gifted, qualified people, not just waiting for educated people. And so I think that's really great. And I appreciate, I mean, some people think it's so silly, like, well, how come you couldn't raise your hands before? And how come, like, you've demonstrated that you can do all this stuff as a commissioned pastor. How come you couldn't take a call anywhere then and just be a pastor? But I really appreciate the guardrails that are put in place to protect the pastorate, while also having this really open-handed approach to allowing lay people the opportunity to learn and lead. So we kind of are, it's like a both and kind of thing. Like we're encouraging lay people to take positions and do these things, at the same time saying, but there's a really like important role of education and proper training too.
Most
So we
definitely.
want to have both, which is I agree with, and we both talked before too. We're kind of CRC through and through, born and raised. So maybe I'm just biased, but anyways, Ben, tell me a little bit. I'm not a student at Calvin, which is our seminary, by no reason other than proximity and some things I heard about TEDS. But tell me a little bit about the program there and your experience and sort of the process of the MDiv, your sense of the program, etc.
For sure. So I have been at Calvin Seminary since 2017. I've taken a little bit of a slower approach as a part-time student to finish my MDiv. I began as an on-campus student living in Grand Rapids and then transitioned into the distance learning program. So it's been kind of cool for me to have the perspective of a student who's taking courses
Sure.
in person, on campus, but also through distance learning. And one thing that I love especially about distance learning is the chance to engage with students from across the US and Canada, and even some people on the other side of the world who are enrolled in the MDiv program. And the special blessing of that is that we get to see each other in person 1 week out of the semester, because we all come into Grand Rapids for a week of in-person intensive.
Sure.
So I'll be doing that the second week of October in Grand Rapids for about 5 days, just to be with professors and students in person. I especially love Calvin Seminary because of the flexibility that distance learning program provides,
Mm-hmm.
but also for the opportunity to engage in ministry concurrently while also taking seminary courses. So it's been a true gift to have served over the last couple of years as an intern in a couple of different CRC congregations. I've actually been out in California for a summer internship out in the Sacramento area. As an on-campus student, I served at a church in Grand Rapids for a year, and was extremely blessed to partner with that congregation and be mentored by the pastor there. So I would say the MDiv program at Calvin does seek to do a very nice job of engaging both academics in the classroom or online if you're a distance student,
Sure.
but also getting you the vocational formation and field education that you need within local congregations, which is just as important.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned to me that they're revamping the program some. What is being revitalized and what is being lost in that turnover?
Yeah, so the MDiv program actually has just changed. Synod 2022 just approved a complete curriculum revision for the MDiv at Calvin, which a committee of faculty members had been working on for quite a while. And essentially, the biblical languages, so Greek and Hebrew, will no longer be a requirement for students. It's still going to be available and highly encouraged. But because of Bible software programs like Logos that allow you to dive into the languages without really needing to know so much vocabulary and grammar, we really don't have to spend as much time learning the languages in depth as what we would have needed to before these technologies were available to us. So I actually have taken a full year of Hebrew and a full year of Greek, which I very, very much appreciate. And I would have done that regardless because I highly value the biblical languages. But for students who maybe aren't as interested in preaching every week and needing to dive into the languages on a regular basis, they'll have a bit of a different approach in the future in taking courses that deal more with the tools like these Bible software programs for learning the languages rather than learning so much vocabulary and grammatical tools for the ins and outs of both Hebrew and Greek. So that's one change. Another change that they've made is related to preaching. They've actually reduced the preaching requirements for the MDiv program, which they mean to be a good thing because some students just don't need as much classroom experience in terms of learning preaching methodology. I'm not convinced necessarily that that's the wisest approach to take. We actually just lost our longtime preaching professor to retirement, Dr. John Rotman, who I really appreciated having as a student. So I'm not sure what the long-term plans are for faculty on the preaching side of things, homiletics, but for most students, if they are able to pass the introductory preaching course with a grade of, I think, B or better, they may not have to take much else in terms of homiletics throughout the rest of their program.
Yeah. Well, I normally ask for prayer requests to close, Ben, but I think my free Zoom sign up is going to run out of time shortly. So I will say that we will be praying for you and your wife as you make the transition. It's going to be an easy transition because Wisconsin is a lot like Michigan, just better. So that'll be easy for you guys. I'm kidding. I don't know. I think it's better, but and pray for you as you prepare for your examination and to share that sermon at Classis in a couple weeks. So we'll meet in person. Absolutely. There and look forward to meeting you.